So welcome back. Now it's time for us to go and write the test cases for our service layer. So we have written the test for controller. There are a few methods left which you can write yourself. Then we wrote for converter. Then now it's time for the service layer. Remember, we write the test only for the lines of code. So if there's an interface like this, we don't have to write the test for this because here there is no executable code. They are all abstract methods, so we don't have to worry about interfaces like this or the repository layer that is also an interface, so we don't have to worry about them. So now let's go ahead and write the test for our service layer. So for the service layer, we have to go and do the same thing like create a package here and say service, and in here we have to now go ahead and create the test class for our test writing the test for our service. So I'm going to go to IMPL and take it from here, refactor, rename, copy, and then right click here, new class test. So here now we have to again follow the same steps that we had done. So we have to say extend with Mockito extension dot class, and now we have to go and write inject our service. So we'll say private property service. We could say property service IMPL or property service, anything is fine, and we say inject mocks. Now let's go ahead and write down the first test method for which we want to write the test. So first method is save property. So we'll go and say private or just void, sorry, test save property success scenario. I'm writing for success scenario. You can write for more scenarios as well. And of course, let's annotate with test. If you want, you can say add display name to give them some name. And the first thing that we have to do is we have to call property service dot save property, and what it takes is it takes a property DTO. So let's go ahead and create a property DTO. So property DTO equal to new of property DTO, and of course let's put some value. So DTO dot set maybe title, let's say dummy, and now we pass this DTO here. Once we do this, it's going to return us something for on which we will do an assertion. So this is going to return us a property DTO which will be basically having the ID in it because it's going to save it into the database. So we know that it will have the ID in it. But if you see, there are a few things happening. First, the property DTO is getting converted to an entity via the converter. Then that entity is getting saved, and then that entity is again getting converted to a DTO, and that a DTO is being returned. So we have to somehow bypass this pieces of code, otherwise we will have problems. So let's go ahead and do that. So first we have to inject the converter. So I'm going to take these two. In fact, I'm going to take converter. Then I have to also take the repository. And I have to annotate both of them with @mock so that they will get memory from Mockito and their mock instance will be injected in this property service so that we will not get null pointer exception in here. We will not get null pointer at this line and this line. So let's go ahead and write the logic to bypass this. So first we have to say Mockito dot when property converter dot, let's check which method it is. Property converter dot, this method is called convert DTO to this is called with anything Mockito dot anything. Then return, then return. We have to return a entity because that's what it is expecting. It is expecting an entity. So we'll say then return property entity equal to new property entity. And by now this property entity will not have ID because it's not yet saved. So let's just save the title with dummy. So now we will give it this one. So with this line, what it will do is it will, when this line will execute, when the code is running here, so instead of going here, it's going to return us the entity object that we are giving to it. It will do something like this. So let's get back this one to control Z. Yes. So now that entity is going to pass to this DB and the same entity will pass here, and in the converter we should get the DTO. But remember this entity will now have the ID as well. So that is something we have to use for assertion. That's good. So now we have to bypass this line as well. So I have to write another time. I have to say so what we have done so far is we bypass this line, which is good, but then we also have to bypass this line. Remember that. So first let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say Mockito dot when, we can say property repository dot save when it is called with any object, let's say Mockito dot any object. Then in our case we would like to return, then return an entity object with an ID. So I will say property entity saved entity, and this will have the ID new property entity, and I will say saved entity, sorry, saved entity. Let's give that name, that's meaningful. Saved entity dot set of title, we can give the same title as dummy. But now that this entity is going to come from the database, so it will have all automatically generated ID as well. So let's give that as one long L because this data type is of type long. So we want to return this entity from the user. Perfect. So now with these two Mockito.when then lines, we will get past this line and this line, which is good. And here we will get an entity which will be nothing but this entity, saved entity. We'll get the saved entity replaced in this line. Let's just this for simplicity sake. Okay. And now this saved entity will be assigned here and this will go to this converter. So when it will go to the converter, we need another DTO to be returned. So let's bypass this line. So here we will say Mockito dot when property converter dot convert entity to DTO is called with any object. Let's say Mockito dot any object, not any boolean, instead any object. Then return a DTO with an ID. So I'll say property DTO saved DTO equal to new property DTO, and we will say saved DTO dot set of I title as dummy, saved DTO dot set of ID as 1L, same ID. So now we will pass this. We can set more values here. I'm just setting ID and title. That is sufficient for testing purpose. So now after doing this line, so we will also get rid of this, and then instead of this, Mockito will return our save DTO instance. So what else is left? So now our method will be called, which is this. So when this method is getting called, we have already said if you see dependencies, what you have to do. So it sees this dependency, so it knows now what to do. This dependency, it knows what to do. This dependency, and it knows what to do, and it returns a DTO. So let's capture that DTO. So we'll say property DTO result equal to, that's our thing. So we'll say assertions dot assert equals, and then we'll say expected is, we expect that there should be an ID. So we'll say save DTO dot get ID should be equal to the result DTO dot get of ID. So that should be our test scenario. Let's go ahead and test this. So I will run this in the coverage mode to just see how much lines it covers. So it's running it now. So we see that I would say do not apply this. Click here to see the test. So here it says cannot instantiate inject mocks property of cost type service in an interface. Okay, sorry. So we have given it as interface, so it should not be the case. We have to give it as, it says it, you have to use the class. So our class is property service IMPL. So that is what we have to use. So property service, let's say IMPL. Copy this and replace it wherever we have called it. Perfect. So now if we run our test again, let's see how it goes. Perfect. So our test passed. Now if I go here, there is no coverage shown. So let me run the test again with the coverage mode. Add to active suites. And if I go now to the service layer, we see that the test is covered the lines. Perfect. So this is how we can do the testing of our service layer. This is it for this video. Thank you for watching.